Jessica Eley, welcome to the School of Self-Mastery podcast plus Summer Fridays. I'm excited to have you here. You're finally babyless for a few moments.
Yeah.
So maybe they'll come in. I don't know. I think you got a few minutes away. So I'm super, super excited to have you here and to talk about what we're going to talk about, because it has a lot to do with your own life now too, right?
Yeah, for sure.
I love it. So tell my audience, because I already know obviously about you and what you do and what we're going to talk about today, but tell everyone a little bit about how you would describe what it is that you do.
So I help entrepreneurs deal with their personal shit so that it doesn't stop them up, and so that they can deal with the things going on in their personal lives without it impacting their business. So some people like to think that work and life is separate, but work is a part of life.
Yeah.
So if you think that one area isn't bleeding into another, you're sadly mistaken. So I help people deal with the personal side.
I love that. And even when I was in corporate, actually, I did this presentation for the lead team, and part of it was about work-life integration, because everyone calls it like this work-life balance. I'm like, there is no work-life balance. You gave me a cell phone where you called me at 5 a.m., right? Like, right. That doesn't constitute work-life balance. So if we could stop looking at it that way, it would be much more helpful and respectful of me, right? Like, I have no problem answering my work cell phone at 5 a.m. Well, sometimes I did. But the fact that we think, oh, when you go home, you're not working. And that's even like in like a corporate role, like it's so much different even for entrepreneurs, because there really is no like delineation, especially because my mind is like always thinking about my business, right?
Yeah.
But if we call it like this work-life integration, or really, what you do is like helping people deal with that personal shit, so that like, because it's there. And I think the problem is that people are just like, no, that doesn't have anything to do with my business.
Right. And it does. It always does.
It always does. And like, even when I was in a corporate role, I still remember like, my personal life affecting how I felt in my day job.
Right.
But now that I have my own business, it's even more so. And same thing, vice versa, right? Like, I take more of my business home with me. So like, quote unquote, right? Like air quotes, I take more of my business home with me because, well, first of all, I work at home. And second of all, it's kind of it's like an attachment of you. It's like you're responsible for it. So there's so much more work that you need to do on yourself as an entrepreneur who, if you want to really effectively run your business, you have to deal with it, you know?
For sure.
Yeah. I think it's an under talked about thing. Do you find that people just avoid this altogether?
Yeah. So there's two kinds of people that I really find. There's like the high achievers that are like, this is baloney. Like, I bully through everything. And like, if I just make enough money, I can ignore the fact that my marriage is crap. Right. And that, no.
Yeah.
And then there's like the people who get really wrapped up in their stories, and they want like everything about their personal lives to be like completely perfect before they do anything in their business. And I'm like, that ain't happening either. Yeah. So, so there's kind of like the two tracks, and neither are good, right? One keeps people from even starting, and the other a lot of times either results in bad crap happening at home, or people get burned out in their businesses because they're not taking care of anything other than business.
This is like the perfect topic for the School of Self-Mastery, because that's like essentially my core beliefs around really having every piece of your life taken care of, or at least being conscious and intentional. It doesn't need to be balanced. Like, I don't believe there's like a balance, right? But I do believe that we still need to pay like those minimum payments, if we're working like really heavily on our health at this moment, or we're, I talk about like training for a triathlon. Like, I didn't train for a triathlon when I was like really trying to grow my business, because I was working on the side of my corporate job. Like, there was just not enough time to like really train for a triathlon and do well at it. Right. But I could still go to the gym every day. I didn't need, like I had to like pay that minimum payment just so that I could be a fully functioning, creating the best version of myself, self-mastery type of human.
Right.
but it didn't have to be like balanced. So I think that that's totally part of your message too, you know?
Yeah, I think for a lot of people, balance is really more about how you feel, right? And so if you're consciously choosing priorities for yourself, right? If your priority right now is your business, then right, you might need to let your goals of a half marathon go, and just like do a couple laps around the block every morning. Fine. But when you consciously choose those priorities, then you feel a lot more balanced because you've decided like, hey, this is what's important to me right now. And I know that eventually I'm going to get to these other things that are important to me, but for right now, they have to sit on the side.
Yeah. And I think that's always, I mean, it's the most important piece, right? Because otherwise we're like, oh, but I really want to run this marathon or whatever. And it's like, but you can, just not in this season of your life. You know, like I talk about it like being like very seasonal. And when you consciously choose like, okay, this is the season of my life that I am focused on growing my business, but I'm still going to make, you know, my relationships, an important part of it doesn't mean that they go away. It doesn't mean that you completely ignore them for that time. It's just that we have to make those conscious choices, about what's going to be giving the main priority during that time. If you really want to, I like how you talk about like, you know, feeling balanced, because I think that's much more important than actually being balanced. Because like being balanced is like a white whale. It's like no one's ever seen it. You know, like, oh my gosh, such a good way to lead into this stuff, because what we're going to talk about even more so is relationships. You know, like relationships that actually can ruin your business, and to an extent, right? Like I think that they screw around with your head so much that you're not making the right choices, or you're letting other people like bleed into your thoughts and opinions, and maybe those things aren't as intentional. So there's a ton of different types of relationships that we could be talking about, but tell me a little bit about like the 3 relationships that you believe have the biggest impact on people's businesses, or as an entrepreneur, like which ones we're maybe most susceptible to when it comes to our growth.
So I work a lot with people on their relationship with their parents, with their spouse or their significant other, and then also their relationship with their kids, like as a parent themselves. And the reason it's those 3 for most people is because those are the relationships where we are most vulnerable, right? We're our most self. We display ourselves and they see the good, the bad, the ugly. We also see it from them. And so that openness and that vulnerability also makes us care a lot about the status of those relationships and if they're going good or bad and what that person's going to think of us. And so that tends to also bleed into how we run our businesses. And it's also important to notice that it has nothing to do with if your relationship is good or bad. You can be negatively affected by a good relationship too. So it's not just like, okay, so if you have like a really great relationship with your spouse and your kids, and now you are thinking about taking your business to the next level, that new level creates uncertainty, right? And Tony Robbins is like really obsessed with certainty and uncertainty. And when we go about changing something really big like this, and we're talking about going, you know, from the status quo to 6 figures, or we're talking about retiring a spouse or moving or whatever, things that would come about from our relation or from our business being successful, that has implications for our relationships. And anytime we talk about changing a big aspect of our lives like that, there's always like this, well, how is it going to change what I already have? Whereas if you fail, really the cost of failure for most people is just everything kind of staying the same, right? You maybe like lose the time you sunk into it, or like a few $1,000, you can recover the money. But when you're talking about being successful and kind of changing everything in your life, it's really scary to think about how a really positive relationship could also suffer from that.
So people essentially sometimes stop themselves from creating that success because of the potential repercussions of achieving that success and what that will do to their relationships.
Yes.
Do you think that, and maybe I already know this answer, but just for, maybe I don't, do you think it's always subconscious, or is it potentially conscious, subconscious? Like, we're not really sure. Like, can it happen both ways?
It can happen both ways, for sure.
Yeah.
Because, sometimes you're aware of, for instance, if you are talking about taking your business to another income level, then maybe you know how your parents will react to that. Maybe they've been supportive to this point because that's how much money they made. And now you're talking about going way past that. And then you start butting up against the things that you heard from them when you were a kid. Or that so far, and as sad as this is, right, we like to think that we're post-feminist society here, but it happens a lot with women, right? That they're like, I'm kind of scared what's going to happen when I make more than my husband. Like, is he going to feel like I chopped his balls off?
Oh, this is like a big one in our household. And I always try to talk about this, like, with my clients, as most of my clients are women. Some of them are men. But as they start, and this happens so often, that I love that you brought it up, because women are in the rising, percent of income generation, income earners, and even more so in entrepreneurship, actually. Like, there's many more female entrepreneurs now getting into the space, and that's maybe because of children, or because the potential of working on your own, or being, I don't know, like, I guess specifically, I don't have data on that, but I think it's so important to talk about, because I talk about this with my clients. Like, yes, we're working on your business, but if this issue starts happening, we need to talk about it, right? Because it's real, right? Like, it's definitely come up in our own household of like, my confidence has always been pretty strong, which is already like emasculating probably, right? Because I'm very masculine in my energy.
Right.
I mean, I can like get dressed up and put heels on and curl my hair, but I'm still like very driven. I'm the masculine doer. And not to say that my man is not masculine, but as I became the primary earner in our family, I think that his confidence almost began to drop, right? Like, I didn't chop his balls off or anything. Maybe he felt that way at certain points. And I think that it's always, I just don't think that people are talking about it as often. And I think it's really important because, that can definitely affect your relationships. And I'm just going to be real here. Like, it can affect your sex life. It can affect, everything that you're doing. And that could potentially stop you from, oh, okay, I do have the potential to earn more, but what, like, if I earn even more, what's that going to do to my relationship?
Right.
Then,
Nobody wants to choose between making more sales and getting laid.
Right. Right. No.
That's a really bad choice to make, right?
Right. There's a topic for you to write about, right? Yeah. So I think that, this is such a good, conversation, so to speak, to have and to really think about how those relationships are really being affected by our businesses, and vice versa, how our businesses are being affected by our relationships. Because even like thinking about my fiance again, which he's probably in the other room being like, stop talking about me. But thinking about, his money mindset, and we've talked about, well, when, we'll become millionaires and have, we'll have millions of dollars, and I'm totally cool with that. And I know that I want to earn even more than just $1 million a year. I want to earn tens of millions of dollars a year, because I want to be able to give millions of dollars away. And that was something that, like, I kind of like shattered my own money mindset ceiling. I was like, oh my gosh, I don't want to just earn $1 million. I want to earn multi-million dollars so I can give it away. And, I asked him, like, well, what would your family like think about that? And he was like, oh my God, like, I don't even want to know. Right. Because that's so not normal. That I'm not worried, because I don't know. I'm just not worried about what they think of me, but obviously he is worried about like what they would think of him, or will we still fit in, right? Like, will they still like us? What are they going to say about us?
Right.
Yep. So imagine that's like a common conversation.
Yes. And I mean, that's kind of where you get into like the parent thing, right? Like, and it, you know, some people have asked, like, why don't you talk about friends? At the end of the day, we always know that we can go get new friends, or that, like, you know, you can still go like shopping with this one friend. They don't need to be all encompassed in your life, but like
Right.
you only get one set of parents. And if you feel like you're going to kind of draw the wrath of the family down on you, I mean, nobody wants to go through the holidays like that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, it's for sure a thing. And you know, to put yourself in the position where you're choosing to be the black sheep, even if it's for a great reason, you still have to be okay with being the weirdo.
Yeah. So is that part of it? Is that part of dealing with it, is like being okay with being the weirdo? Because I mean, I could like, I'm totally the weirdo now amongst my like college friends. They're like, I don't even know what you do. I'm like, it's fine. Right.
Yeah. Right. But they don't care. Yeah. I mean, some of it, so a big thing with parents is deciding what you're okay with them knowing. Right. Sometimes adults never got out of that. I tell my mommy and daddy everything. Right.
So I have to tell you something as you go into this, because Tyler, my fiance, he's been like ragging on me for months because my dad, for some reason, still has access to my bank account, because it was it was our bank account. It was my first bank account.
Right.
And I signed up for a debit card when I went to college. Like literally the actual debit card still has my like 18-year-old picture, and they keep sending me that card. I'm like, can we get like an updated picture or something? And they just send it to me.
Yeah.
And he's like, because my dad will like email me sometimes if like there's some specific activity in my bank account. And he's like, can you get your dad off of there? Like he doesn't need to know that stuff. Right. Like, and I'm like, you're so right. Like, why is he still on that account?
Right. Well, and sometimes for some people, it's like, you know, you want to have somebody to share a win with. And we're kind of conditioned to think like, oh, I'm going to call mom, right? Mm-hmm. And if your mom is supportive, that's awesome. If your mom's not supportive and she's just not going to get it, then don't call her. Right. And that has nothing to do with like disrespect or anything like that. That's you knowing what your mom values and knowing what you value and saying like, hey, we have different values, and I'm going to talk to people about the things that I value with people who value similar things. Mm-hmm. And the other issue is if your mom is really supportive, you don't want to get hung up on calling mom and having all of your accomplishments validated by mom, right? I mean, that's not healthy either way. So it's important to kind of draw a line in the sand and decide, like, what am I comfortable with people knowing? If you don't want your parents to know how much you make, then don't talk about it on a podcast.
Or right? Don't give them access to your bank account, right?
Or that, right.
I'm like, that is the dumbest thing, like, that I didn't even know that I still had him on there. But yeah, he doesn't need to know how much money is in my, you know, personal savings account or whatever. And that was just kind of by default. But luckily I have a respectful enough dad that he doesn't comment on it or anything. But I'm sure that he honestly probably doesn't want to know either, because it probably makes him just as uncomfortable as it makes me, right? And so being able to understand like what is almost like keeping them on like the need to know basis for that kind of stuff. And so I guess, how do you figure out like what, if your parent is supportive or not? Like, do you just have that initial conversation and then you'll kind of be able to tell like, oh, they don't, maybe, because maybe someone out there has never had these conversations, or they're thinking, oh, I've never told them anything about my business, right? Well, maybe have that initial conversation, and if they respond negatively, then just don't tell them anything again, or what?
Yeah, I mean, there's kind of like a trial and error phase, you know, like you're gonna screw up and you'll say something and there'll be like a reaction one way or the other. And you'll get a feel pretty quick for like, did that make me feel good about what it is I'm doing? Or like, is that the type of comment that's going to live in my head and then make me question what it is I'm doing when I go forward?
Right. So let me give an example, because I'm just like, you're bringing up all this stuff for me that I'm like, oh, I do that. I did that with like intentionally in my own business, because when I first started my business, I didn't tell pretty much anyone until I was like making money in it, right? Like I kind of was doing it on the side. I didn't like tell them about this like crazy idea I had, because I think that they probably would have been like, oh, my dad and my brother are like overly protective of me. And so I had this like great corporate job. And so I knew that they were going to be like, you're crazy, don't leave that job. And I didn't really want anyone else telling me to not leave the job.
Right.
So I didn't tell them until I was like creating my own success, financially stable. Right. So I was like, oh, and here's this thing I'm doing. I'm leaving my job. I was like, I paid off all my debt. I'm leaving my job.
Yep.
And they were a little shocked. They were like, are you crazy? Like, are you okay? Like, do you have enough money?
Right.
Like, yeah, I do. Right. And then like, that was so much of an easier decision for me, because I had already made the decision, versus like going and looking for that approval, or like you said, like the validation of like, can I do this, Dad? Right.
Exactly. And so that's where like a positive relationship can really slow you down, because you have to understand that if you are in that type of positive relationship, that person's interest is in keeping you safe, right? Mm-hmm. And they want the best for you, and what they know the best for you is whatever you currently have usually, right? Mm-hmm. As long as like shit has not hit the fan for you yet, they don't want anything to change for you, because you're doing okay, and they don't need to worry about you right now. But if you're talking about changing all of that,
then they might have to worry.
Right.
Oh, that's good. And the other thing, like when I first started my business, he told me, he called me, he said, I'm worried about the business that you have. This is so funny. If you're watching the video, you can get this video too at adriandorson.com/Jessica. If you're listening to the podcast, you can watch the video as well, because Jessica's eyeballs were like, oh, this is going to be good. Right? So he was called me, he's like, I'm worried because I don't want you to become codependent, or for these people to become codependent on you. And that puts a lot of pressure on you. Like all of the, if they don't succeed or whatever, like they're going to be very codependent on that relationship. And I was like, I got this, right? Like, I was like, don't worry, I'm an adult, right? I'm an adult. I know how to, handle my clients and what I'm okay with and what I'm not okay with. And I can set my own boundaries. But he was like worried about what potential problems this could create. And I'm just not available for that kind of conversation.
Right.
So I'm very, I guess, guarded, or just not openly sharing whenever I have like problems or challenges in my business. I don't really share those with my dad, because I know that he will be like overly protective of me. Right. But I do have people that I can share it with. So I think that's maybe the other important part, right? Like,
yeah. So you have to understand that like people like your parents, or a lot of times even your spouse, are not coming from a place of understanding your business. Right. And so they're not really in a position to advise you in a way that is going to actually help you. Their interest is, again, just to
safe. Yeah. Yeah. So like having someone like you, like I obviously have someone like you in my life, as well as business besties that I've created that like I can go to and they'll tell me like the honest truth, right? Like even if it's going to hurt my feelings or call me out, because I think that having those like third party people is so important. Don't think that people value that enough. And that's why they get discouraged. So what do you see happening when they don't have those types of people that they can go to, and they're always trying to go to their parents, and they're always trying to go to like their spouse, and then they're not getting the advice, the like expert advice that they actually, or feedback or third party feedback that they really do need to grow their business, right? Like they're just going to people that are going to keep them safe. What do you see happening there?
So what happens there is that you have like a values conflict, right? If anybody who's listening to this and who's following you probably has like this hunger to do more, and you're kind of naturally a risk taker as an entrepreneur, or you're just not going to make it. Mm-hmm. And so for people who like to leap and jump and like, I'll, sew up my parachute on the way down, that is going to scare the crap out of your family. And if you know that and you're going to them for help and advice, then you're going to stand on the cliff and sew up your parachute there. Right.
Yeah.
And then you're going to check it for holes, and then you're going to test it a little bit. No, I mean, at some point you just have to jump.
Right.
But that's not comfortable for everybody else. And so a lot of times people get held back, and they don't take the risks that they normally would. They're not as clear or as ballsy about what it is they really want to do. They're kind of always holding back.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, you might be making multi-six figures and still holding back, right? Holding back looks different for everybody. For somebody, it's going to be I'm holding back in my Etsy shop. And for somebody else, it's going to be, I'm holding back by applying for TEDx instead of for TED.
Mm. Yeah, that's a good point. I know that we all do that, especially when, that, and it's so interesting because I had a conversation a couple weeks ago on the podcast with a woman named Shelley David Askew, and we talked about fear, but we were talking about your own fear and really how that's time is it helps fear grow, right? As you take more time, the fear is growing. And I was yeah, it's kind of like jumping in a pool, whereas you if you just dip in, you're oh, it's so cold, I don't want to get in, right?
Yeah, you think about it too much.
You think about it too much, but if you just jump, it's fine, and you're not cold anymore.
Right.
But this is almost not even your own fear, but someone else putting their fear on you, which is even worse. It's not even yours.
Yeah. I mean, and the thing is, it comes from a good place both ways, right? They are putting their fear on us because they care about us and they want you to be okay. And you're kind of allowing that and holding yourself back because you don't want to, jeopardize that relationship. If it's important to you, then that's the type of thing you do. But it's important to know that you can still have a solid relationship with boundaries in place.
So is that the way to detach from, what our parents or spouses or, people in our lives are saying? Is it to have those boundaries in place so that we're not oh my God.
Right. So, I mean, I think for parents, for sure. And for spouses, it kind of depends on your relationship, right? For some couples, it works to have very I deal with this, you deal with this. Mm-hmm. For my husband and I, that wouldn't work. We know everything about each other, but at the end of the day, you have to have a very open and honest conversation. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sometimes optional with parents, and it's mm-hmm. not so much optional with a spouse, right? If you want that to work, even if you're going to have a conversation about boundaries, but there has to be that conversation about, this is what I want, this is what I'm going for, here's how I plan to do it. And, you can either be along for the ride, or I'm going for the ride and I'll tell you when I get there and you can meet me. But there has to be some kind of talk about that, because if you're both on separate pages, that's when you have value conflict within your marriage. Mm-hmm. Or, whatever
relationship. Yeah. So let's talk about that, because I love talking about these spousal, intimate relationships, because they are very challenging sometimes to navigate when you're a super driven person or an entrepreneur. Maybe you're living with someone who's not an entrepreneur too. So sometimes they just don't get you at all, right? And that's the person you want to get you the most, or actually who does get you the most. But then there's this one thing, which is such a huge part of your life, that they're what the hell is wrong with you? You're crazy. You're flat out crazy if you're going to do that, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, go ahead.
Well, okay. So I was going to say there's two approaches to this. You have to tell them with how you are keeping yourself and your relationship or your living status safe, right? Mm-hmm. There has to be some kind of agreement on hey, I'm giving this 6 months, or, hey, I'm investing X amount of dollars. And if you're uncomfortable with it, then just let me know if I can have this chunk of change. And then I'm not involving you in how it gets used, right? Mm-hmm. that's my business then. And then the other thing is making sure that they're really validated and feel safe and secure in all the other areas of your relationship. So if you have that kind of tentative spousal relationship, then you want to make sure that outside of the business, you're still nurturing that relationship, probably extra, so that they know, like, hey, even if I become the next, whoever, Oprah,
Right.
I'm still here, right? I still love you. It's all going to be okay. Not everything is changing. It's just that I'm really hungry to make this and this happen. And I'd like to have your support.
Yeah. So they're probably just as worried, if not more, that things are going to change when we start changing through this business, or when we start changing our lives through this business, right? Like ultimately as the entrepreneur, you are taking on some of that decision making for the other person too. And so like you said, like having that initial conversation. And I was talking about this on a different podcast. I did like a 4-person podcast. It was actually in person when I went to Podcast Movement, which was really cool. But we were talking about how women don't make investments in their business as much as they should. And I was like, well, they were saying like because of their partner. And this was like a very conversational interview. And I was like, I don't think it's necessarily because of their partner. Let's not blame it on the man here, right? Like, I think it's because the woman is not confident in her decision, right? To like go to that partner and be like, this is my business. I'm the CEO of this business. And this is something I believe is going to grow my business to where I want it to go. And so I am investing in this. Are you on board with that? Right? Like I want their support, but like making the decision first before I go and be like, well, I'm not really sure. Like, what do you think? Because like, again, they're coming from, I just want to keep you safe. And it doesn't seem like you're so sure about that.
Exactly. Right. And that's the key, right? Because if they're already afraid of everything changing and then you come to them and you're like, hey, what do you think? Like, then you have just introduced even more uncertainty about a thing that already scares the crap out of them.
Yeah, they're uncertain. And now you're being uncertain about the investment you need to make about this uncertain thing. So they're like, no. So no wonder people are like not really getting what they want out of their business plus their relationship, because then they're mad at the spouse. They're like, oh, right. He won't let me do this.
He's not supportive.
He's unsupportive of me and my business. It's like, well, you probably didn't have the confidence in your own decision that you needed to have. I think that's such, and it doesn't even need to be about an investment, right? It could be about pretty much anything inside the business. Do you have kids coming now?
No, I have a fly right
Oh. I saw Jessica look to the side. I thought there was children coming.
Nope.
So let's talk a little bit. Okay, so let's wrap this spousal conversation up before we move on to kids. But so do you think it's important, like what can we do to make sure that relationship is, I guess, being nurtured while I'm, as the entrepreneur, still able to achieve the goals that I want?
Right. You have to make commitments to yourself about what it is you are still available to give to your significant other, right? Mm-hmm. And you need to know like what they need and really make sure that, especially if things are kind of tenuous at the moment, that you are like really taking care of what it is they need to make sure they know you're still here. If so you're the one
sex is what you're saying.
Yeah.
More sex. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But, I mean, it never hurts, right? Yeah, I mean, if you make those commitments, then it's easier for them to support what it is you're doing because they see that you're still there for them. And that portion hasn't changed. And a lot of times you come about making those commitments through like super open conversation, right? If you feel like they're not supportive, then it's not a matter of coming to them and saying like, hey, like what gives? You're not supportive, right?
Because then they feel attacked, right? And they're like, ooh.
Right. And so, yeah, I mean, it's a matter of saying like, hey, I get that this scares you. I get that this is unfamiliar to you. I get that you are more you know, safety oriented, that you would rather have the parachute on your back first, but that's not how I operate. And just have a conversation about that and see where it goes. Because at the end of the day, it's almost always about that person wanting to preserve you and your relationship. And so if you can approach them understanding that, then you're less likely to be antagonistic about it.
I love that. And I think obviously it's always from them probably coming from a place of love, and they're just like, I don't know what to do with you, right? Like, so let's keep this open. Let's talk about kids.
Yeah.
You have kids.
I
don't have any kids. I just have dogs, but I have so many women in my life recently who have been having kids. And so we're even going to do a little like mom series on the podcast too, like how to run your business while being a mom. So I'll probably reach back out to you, and we may need to have another interview,
right.
Because, you know, my assistant just had her own baby, and things change when that happens. Right. And like, as a business owner, like, how do you deal with that relationship in your business? And well, how do you know, coming from you, like, cause I don't really know this yet. Right. So like, how does that even affect your business at all? Like, what does that look like?
So for a lot of women, what ends up happening, and I'll say women because that's usually where
more so.
I won't say that it doesn't happen with dads, but they have an easier time of detaching, right? You're not going to find many dads in a daycare parking lot crying their eyes out. It doesn't happen much.
My brother was actually already talking last night about how he's going to bring his little baby to CrossFit. He's like, here's all the moves I can do with the baby on my chest.
Nice.
Oh, good. I'm glad you got the list down.
Right.
But yeah, he probably wouldn't cry if he couldn't bring her.
Right. Yeah.
He just wants to still work out. So.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and you know, as a super broad generalization, men tend to be better about compartmentalizing that type of thing. So yes, for moms, a lot of times it's a matter of making decisions in their business from a place of being scared how their business is going to affect their kids. So if I have a full client load, does that mean I'm never going to see my kids anymore? If I don't make enough money, am I going to have to put them in a crap preschool? I mean, either way, again, right? It doesn't matter if they're afraid of being really successful or being an utter failure. They're parenting and making decisions in their business from a place of being scared what's going to happen to their kids.
So it's like a lose-lose.
Yeah.
So how do we win?
You win by not parenting your kids from a place of fear. So that comes about for most people because I've heard this from so many people. I'm desperate for my kids to love me. Right.
Wow.
And as soon as you realize that there is nothing you can do to make your kid love you, you can love them unconditionally. You can give them the moon, and they may still choose to hate you. And that breaks people's hearts when I say that. Right. But if you can be okay with the fact that you have zero control over whether your kid is going to have an awesome relationship with you someday, because they are the second party in this relationship.
Yeah.
And if you can detach from being dependent on your kid loving you back, then it's easier to make decisions that are good for you and them. So that's a matter of being okay with loving them completely unconditionally, which also means realizing they may never reciprocate that love. The irony is that if you are an example of unconditional love to your kids, there's a really good chance they're going to model that back to you.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's kind of like that weird scenario of as soon as you detach from it, you're far more likely to actually get what it is you want.
What's an example of how we could be like detached from that? Like, is there something you could think of where, like a scenario of what that looks like?
For a lot of people, it's like the time factor, right? They feel bad for like leaving their kids, or they'll be hesitant to pursue an opportunity because it's a logistical nightmare in terms of wrangling the kids. Like, look, it took me an hour just to get my kids ready to do this, right?
Right. And they're not even here. They're not even on camera. So
no, right? I mean, like, it took me an hour to like
just
pack
like,
a diaper bag and like
right.
feed the baby and get them loaded in the car. And, you know, I mean,
Yeah.
right. But
Dad's just like driving them around the block right now.
Probably, yes. With any luck, they're still in the car.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so if you can,
so does that, let's use you. So like, does that come up for you? Like, oh, I have to do this interview. And the kids come up and they're like, Mom, we want you to come with us. Right. Like, is that when it usually pops up? And then we're like, oh, I'm going to feel guilty that I can't go with you, honey. I need to do this thing for work. Right.
I think actually for most people, the guilt comes way before, because like by the time I'm loading my kids in the car for this, like I've decided we're committed. This is happening, right? Whether you scream with dad in the car or not, like I'm still doing this. Sorry, dad.
Yeah.
The problem comes like when we're exploring opportunities, right? Because then we tend to like blow it out of proportion in our heads. Like, what's going to happen to my kids if they have to spend, 3 hours with a stranger so that I can do this and this? And like, at the end of the day, they're probably going to be just fine.
They might like it more.
Exactly.
Maybe that's another fear too, right?
Yeah. I mean, right. I mean, it shows up in all kinds of ways, but it all comes back to usually like we really want our kids to love us, and anything that we think is going to decrease our approval ratings, like, oh, I'm not going there. Or like, that's a touchy subject, and I might lose some parent kudos. Let go of the kudos. Just love your kids.
I love it. I can even like, it's so not a good example because I just have a dog. But like when I had my dog when he was a puppy and I had to like leave him at home when I went to work, I was like, I felt horrible. Like all I could think about was that dog when I was at work. I was like, but you know what? Whenever, and actually he's the opposite of humans, right? Because it didn't matter. Like he's the prime example of unconditional love. I could do whatever. And he was just like, I just love you, and like,
and the thing is, I mean, kids are naturally wired that way too.
Yeah.
Right.
And we train them.
Yeah. Right. Not until we show them like that. Oh God, like, were you scared that mom was gone? And like, was this traumatic for you? Oh, well, should it be traumatic for me, mom? Like,
right.
So we do that in part to ourselves.
Yeah. So what are some of like the big tips you would give people around relationships in general? Let's start like wrapping this baby up, because I know I could talk to you all day about like, this is like so fun for me. I feel like I just had a session too. Nice. Like what would be some parting tips that you would give people who are maybe like just kind of realizing as this conversation unfolds between you and I that, wow, I have some of this going on in my own life and I'm growing this business, but I'm not realizing how much my personal shit is affecting it, or I know how much it's affecting it, but I'm not doing anything about it. Like what tips would you give them, or what do they need to do now?
Right. So this is like really a matter of boundaries and commitments. So we kind of talked about that with parents, right? Like deciding what it is that is safe for them to know, but it's also a matter of drawing some boundaries in your business, right? Maybe you are completely unwilling to ever talk to a client on a weekend because that's family time, or you commit to spending, one evening each week with your husband, or you decide that, hey, like these couple hours in the afternoon are saved for my kids. When we make like those conscious choices, then it's a lot easier to know what it is we're going to do when different scenarios pop up, right? If your mom calls you and spontaneously asks you a question about your business and you haven't already decided what those boundaries are for yourself, you're far more likely to just,
word vomit.
and then you're going to feel bad about it afterwards. So when you've made some choices, then it's easier to honor those as they come up.
Mm-hmm. So often does it happen where people, and I'm just, thinking of self, because you think people are probably out there thinking like, I'm trying to grow my business. I can't not answer a client on a weekend because that'll ruin my business. Is that the kind of shit that you help people deal with too? Because obviously that's crazy for you to think, right?
Right. I mean, that's all coming from a place of fear, right?
Yeah.
And when we're scared of what other people are going to think, and we're not able to just say like, this is what I do, this is what I've figured out is good for me. And in turn, by doing what's good for me, I'm able to do what's good for other people. Mm-hmm. If we haven't decided that, then yeah, I mean, you're kind of a virtual doormat.
Yeah. And it also stems from like, I think initially setting up those commitments so that like yes. what are, and the boundaries in the beginning. So like what are the expectations that other people that I've, allowed other people to hold me to and really given to myself. But if you never, like you said, if you never set those, then you just feel like you have to be that doormat because there's no, like, it's just a default setting now.
Yes. Yeah.
I love that. All right. We're going to give people, I know you have a workbook for them. So it's all about like how to set those boundaries and the commitments, right? So kind of working through both pieces.
Right. So
perfect.
That, how to handle the relationships either way, good or bad.
Yeah. Does it deal with those 3 relationships specifically, or is this for like any types of boundaries, commitments that you need to set in your life?
It's more specific to those relationships. But yeah, I mean, you can certainly use it elsewhere. It's a good place to practice.
Yeah, a good place to start. Perfect. So you guys can go to jessicaeley.com. Eley, sorry. Eley, not like jelly. Eley, jessicaeley.com/Summer Fridays. I will put a link in the show notes as well. Or if you're watching this on video, there's a link right below us. So it's jessicaeley.com/Summer Fridays. Jessica, anywhere else that they should go to find out more about what you're doing?
No, that's a good spot.
All right. Go find that workbook and start taking action on that stuff. I know that this is something that I work on in my own life and business because I know that for me, I always was working with, well, not always, but like as an adult, I knew that I had a lot of personal shit to deal with. Believe me, we all do, whether you think it or not. And so I was always going to a therapist. And I just think that working with someone like you, really nothing negative about therapists. I think that stuff works too. I think it's important, but it was so much faster for me to work with someone like you and work through my personal shit so that I can grow my business. And it was really helpful to work with an entrepreneur because they understood me even that much more. So if you guys are interested, contact Jessica. She's amazing. And thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you for having me.
Thanks for hubby too. Thank hubby too for taking the kiddos. Yes. Jessica just had a baby. So she's got her hands full. So I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Everyone, go to jessicaeley.com/Summer Fridays, and we will see you back here next week for more.